Hi, I'm Niall. Thank you for joining us again for the WeConnect Wednesday video series. Last week we discussed the role power and privilege plays in our life. Today we are going to talk about responsibility. But first, let's join our friends at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute.
On the morning of September 15, 1963, the 16th Street Baptist Church received a call. A young girl, Carolyn McKinstry, picked up the phone. The words spoken to her were simple but terrifying. You have 3 minutes. Less than 30 seconds later, a bomb exploded outside the building. Most people in the church only sustained minor injuries because the church had very thick stone walls meant to prevent hate attacks like these from harming people who might be inside the church. However, the men who placed the bomb outside the church, 4 men, members of the Ku Klux Klan known as the Cahaba River Boys, had placed it behind some stairs right in front of a window that led to the basement in the church. 5 girls had been sitting in the basement preparing for Sunday school that morning. 4 of whom were right by the window. These 4, Addie Mae Collins, age 14, Carol Robertson, age 14, Denise McNair, age 11, and Cynthia Wesley, age 14, all died that day. The 5th girl, Sarah Collins, Addie Mae's younger sister, was permanently blinded in the explosion.
The bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church brought national attention to the city of Birmingham.
From one Bloody Sunday to another, here we have the Selma to Montgomery marches. Before this, Selma had already been an important part of the civil rights movement. At this time, Martin Luther King Jr. had been arrested, and Malcolm X had to come into the city of Selma and tell them, either you negotiate with King or you deal with me. Later that year, the murder of activist Jimmy Lee Jackson prompted the Selma to Montgomery marches. What occurred was protesters marched from Selma to Montgomery across the Edmund Pettus Bridge across multiple days in March of that year. The first major event of these marches was Bloody Sunday, which occurred March 7th. On this day, as protesters crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were faced with opposition from both KKK members, white citizens, and police officers. There, John Lewis was beaten brutally, close to death, and it was that day that he became a prominent figure historically, and Edmund Pettus Bridge was immortalized as a symbol of the civil rights movement. The next important event in the Selma to Montgomery marches was Turnaround Tuesday, which directly followed after Bloody Sunday. Instead of walking across the bridge, they stopped, kneeled there, and then turned around, ending the protest. The third and most successful of the Selma to Montgomery marches occurred after Frank Johnson, the face of justice, enforced that the National Guard come out and support the protesters who needed to be protected because they were expressing their First Amendment rights in the Constitution. As the National Guard helped them, they were finally able to complete their route from Selma all the way to Montgomery. As the civil rights movement draws to a close in this era, there's an important thing we need to recognize about this timeline. If you look here, we have a lot of black marks on the wall. What this means is people died. This is important because as this movement was drawing to a close, and drawing to a close successfully, the counter movement of racism and white supremacy was growing more and more desperate. They were backed into a corner and they were willing to take lives to fight for their racist beliefs. So when we look on this wall, we see that reflected. Here we have the death of Malcolm X, a civil rights leader who was murdered in New York City. We also have the death of Jonathan Daniels, a civil rights leader. There, we have 3 SNCC activists who were killed in the South. Later, in 1968, we have the death of Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis, which was a real blow to the civil rights movement, and it prompted protests and riots across the United States, and also made people realize that no matter what happens, no matter what laws are passed, there's still going to always be a fight against racism, which is shown by his death. 2 of the biggest acts we need to talk about that were passed is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which effectively eliminates discrimination in the South. It reintegrates, it forces public housing, jobs, and workplaces to be equal. And then we have the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which effectively eliminates poll taxes, literacy tests, and all the methods that were used by southern states to delegitimize the black vote. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is very important because people consider it to be a direct result of the Selma to Montgomery protests and marches which occurred in the same year.
And here we have the processional gathering. As you can see by the statues, there are old, young, blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, students, and teachers. This whole exhibit right here was supposed to represent Martin Luther King's dream. If you look out the window, this overlooks Kellington Park, where thousands of young people marched to fulfill Martin Luther King's dream. Thank you for coming to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute.
We all have common responsibilities as members of this planet. First is personal responsibility. This means that you are in charge of your own life. Only you can move you, feel you, live you, and change you. Next, you have a social responsibility, which is the commitment to the welfare of others and your community. And finally, you also have a legal responsibility to follow the law. People are interdependent of one another. This means that everything they do influences the experience of others. Think for a moment. Have you ever done anything good or bad that affected someone else? I know I have. You are a global citizen, which means that you have a responsibility for people, places, and things around the world, and your actions impact others. The thought of that kind of responsibility may sound overwhelming, but it simply means that we need to treat others fairly. Be kind to those around us, stand up for those who are marginalized, and protect this planet. You can start doing all of that in your community today. What have you learned through the WeConnect Wednesday video series? We would love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Remember, when you make the effort to connect with others, you will find that you might just learn some new things about yourself. Thanks for joining us on this journey.